Okay, great. Well, thank you both for attending. This is our Willamette Week House District 52 endorsement interview. Just a couple ground rules. This isn't necessarily meant to be a debate. We encourage you guys to respond to one another as you see fit, but just try to limit, if you can, interrupting one another. Just let the person finish their thought. So we'll keep it cordial. And then we don't necessarily guarantee equal time. So if we have more questions for one candidate or the other, that's just sort of how it is. Yeah, so anyways, if we'll start with you, Darcy. If you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background and why you're running for this district.
Great, thank you. So my name is Darcy Long, and I am running for Oregon House District 52, and that is the Columbia River Gorge to Mount Hood. And I have been a city councilor in the Dalles for 6 years. I am currently in the middle of my second term. I'm a small business owner.
What kind of business?
A financial advising business called Empower Financial.
Is that a chain, part of a larger group? Single?
Yes.
Okay. How many people work for you?
Just myself. I'm primarily a boutique. I work primarily, not exclusively, but primarily with women who have either been widowed or their husbands have had medical issues, and maybe they didn't have much experience managing the finances, and so they work with me.
Is it a fee-only business, or how do you get compensated?
I do both.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, keep going.
No, that's okay. I'm also a mom of 2 boys. They're in their 20s now. My oldest has autism, so we have a lot of experience with physical and mental health issues in rural areas. And the reason that I want to do this is I have wanted to help people for a long time. When I was in high school, I got to go to something called Girls State, and at that time I thought I was going into the medical profession. And when I got there, I had the opportunity to speak on a seatbelt bill that wasn't going to pass. And after I spoke in favor of it, because I'd had a girlfriend who just died in a car accident, and I thought she would have lived had she been wearing a seatbelt, it passed. And that feeling of being able to impact so many people positively just by speaking up and saying what I had to say really has never left me. And so that's just something I've been working on for my whole life since that point, getting the experience necessary to go and represent people and make good laws.
What other sort of civic involvement have you had other than being on the city council for the Dalles?
Sure. So I do a lot of volunteer work. I always have, especially when my kids were young, because it was hard. Couldn't find childcare, especially for someone with autism. So I've done a lot of food banks. I've served meals. I've done garbage cleanup. Kind of you name it, anything that the community was looking for, I've done. I've gone and spoke at events like Youth Think, their Make a Difference Day, which is basically working with high schoolers and trying to keep them from abusing drugs and alcohol and showing them that there are other options out there for them.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the Dalles.
Okay, got it. Okay, thanks. And Jeff, go ahead.
So, Niles, how are you? It's been a couple minutes since we've seen each other.
Yeah.
So I'm Jeff Helfrich. I was the former state representative for House District 52. But for me, since you don't know me, I grew up in Colorado and Nebraska on a family farm and ranch. So that was a big part of my life. Went in the Air Force, served in the United States Air Force for 4 years, was in the first Gulf War. From there, I was inland Air Force. I was a law enforcement canine handler, so I got to work with dogs and explosives, and I got to travel the world. And I got to help people at a different level and different things. One of the most memorable things I think for me was I got to be the security detail for Bob Hope when he was in Saudi Arabia when we were there just before the war kicked off. And it was pretty special to see that guy. He's funny in person as he is on TV. I decided I wanted to get a career in law enforcement. I applied to several places when I was at Fairchild Air Force Base. I ended up at the Portland Police Bureau eventually. I spent 25 years there in a law enforcement career. I worked all the precincts. I got to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of police work and what goes on. The badge that you wear is the ticket to the greatest show on earth. You get a front row seat to life and what the human condition is. You see the best and worst in people through that. And a lot of positive experiences, a lot of negative experiences in seeing the death, the things, and how government affects people's lives. But, like the biggest thing I've talked about before is I was on the Mounted Patrol Unit, did that for quite a few years, and had a fun time riding the horse. Everybody waved at all 5 fingers until the protest came around, and they didn't like you when you were in the protest. At that point, I met my wife, Shauna, who's originally from the Dalles. She's a doctor. She's a hometown hero kind of there. She was the big college, or she was a big soccer player there, went on to college. She came back there to be a doctor, and so she has a rural practice there in the Dalles as a physician. We met, later got married, moved to Cascade Locks. I got involved in civic stuff outside of the police bureau and helping volunteer for everything there, but was asked to be on city council, or actually asked to be on the budget committee, later as planning commissioner, then on city council itself, served there, was on the board of MCED. Stepped down from that when we moved to Hood River. From there, I moved to Hood River, and I don't know, probably a year, half, 2 years later, I got a phone call from Salem when Mark Johnson stepped down, and they asked if I'd be interested in putting my name in the hat for the position. I did. I was unanimously voted in as a state representative. Served that short session from 17 to 19. We had 2 bills passed unanimously through the House and the Senate. Eagle Creek Fire Recovery Bill, and then the other bill is an education bill and recruiting and retaining teachers. There was a study to do that, and the next step would have been implementing it statewide. Unfortunately, I lost my bid to stay in office. I kept involved with civic engagement. I was volunteering at the food bank or volunteering at the Elks and food baskets. I was recently elected to the Columbia Area Transit Division, or Columbia Area Transit Authority here in Hood River, sit on the CAT board, do that. And that's just basically overall how they run the buses and how do we provide good services for people. And the reason why I'm running is I want to get back to Salem, finish my job, get a reasonable voice at the table. Because as a police officer, when I showed up at somebody's door, it was about fixing a problem. It didn't matter what was beyond that door. There's a problem there, and how do we fix it? And by getting those 2 bills passed as a freshman legislator, I was able to accomplish that. And that's why I want to go back to be that voice at the table. We have to bring balance to Salem right now, and we can see that the balance isn't there. And it's not how we need to govern. We need to have a reasonable voice all the way through.
And you said the last time you served in the legislature was 2019?
No, 2017 through 18, and then in 19, just as the session was starting, so I left. So I was sworn in on in 17, had the full 18, and then just a little bit of 19.
Got it. Okay. And did you run for re-election?
Yes, I said I lost my bid to get reelected.
Okay.
Jeff, I forget, you told us in the primary, how are you making your living now, or are you retired at this point?
So I retired from the police bureau in 17, and then I went to work for Sheriff Reese for a small bit in Multnomah County. But when I went to the legislature, I retired, and I stayed retired because I had to be with my 8 and 10-year-old, at the time, younger dad with my kids. But I work at the Hood River Airport right now as the manager up there at the airport for one of the companies, Hood Tech Aero.
What do they do at that airport? I go by there often. I can't quite figure out what's going on.
They do a lot of things there. There's obviously it's a general aviation airport, and then there's different companies there. So Hood River and the Columbia Gorge region is really a hub of the aerospace industry when it comes to the UAV and camera industry. They have in situ across the river. One of the founders of that company actually owns Hood Tech Aero, and we provide aerial services so we can test his cameras that go on to other customers.
Okay, great.
The biggest thing I think you see out there is the Wham Air Museum. If you've not been there, go to it. It's a really gem of a museum that's out there.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Darcy, if elected, what's 1 or 2 bills that you would look forward to bringing to a session?
So I know that there's work already ongoing, and I would like to partner with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, but the top 3 issues that I know the most about and could write effective legislation on would be mental health care, increasing the availability and quality, especially in rural health care and in rural areas, and for youth. I also work a lot on homelessness issues in the Dalles. I put together a homeless shelter when COVID hit, put in the pallet shelters and got that going. And I noticed when I was working on that there was not a lot of coordination throughout the state, even though those are things that it seemed to me you could create kind of a blueprint with multiple options so that people could do what was right for their area, but they wouldn't have to start from scratch. I did have to start from scratch, even though I was working with the state agencies, and I felt like that was a waste of people's time and energy when we were in such a hurry to do something.
How many people did the homeless homeless shelter serve?
So I ended up with 18 units, which could serve 2 people each. There was never a point that they were all full with 2 because we had people with mental health crises going on where they could only have 1 per unit, but we were always full as far as what we could take and manage on site.
Where'd you guys get the funding from?
So I applied through the Community Action Program that was in the Dalles. It actually serves Hood River County and Wasco County and Sherman County. They gave me a grant to serve Wasco and Sherman County residents, and that money ultimately came through the state from the federal government as part of the COVID funding.
So federal relief dollars, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of candidates come in here and say they want to, write legislation that relates to mental health, expands access and accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a hard time understanding what exactly legislation for that purpose would look like. Can you give me a specific example of what type of legislation you would bring to expand access?
Sure. So the problem that we have right now is that mental health is not available throughout the state, and even where it is available, we don't have enough bed space. And so we need that to be funded at the state level because that's not something small communities are going to be able to afford, right? It's very expensive to create a place like that. And so we need to have that available. We also need more review and oversight of the community health that we have. What we have currently in my district is not serving people well, and it's a management issue at the top, but they're not currently held accountable to anybody. So I think at the legislative level, we could make sure that they are being held accountable and that there are minimum standards that they have to meet or they lose their contract with the state. And then as far as other things, I would say it's the funding mechanism, because when in 1997 is when my son was born, and even slightly before that, I'm not sure exactly what year, they changed how the funding came about for mental health. And instead of having it go through the general fund, it started going through Oregon Health Plan, which meant that people who had private insurance couldn't access mental health care as easily or have as many options for services. The way they wanted you to do it was through Oregon Health Plan, which is wrong, because we don't want people intentionally going on Oregon Health Plan just to get mental health services. So that doesn't make any sense.
Was the alternative to that, though, that OHP didn't cover any mental health services? Like what was?
Correct. So we have Blue Cross Blue Shield at the time, and they kept telling us that there was nothing available along the lines of what we needed, and what was there we had to pay out of pocket because Blue Cross Blue Shield didn't cover it. But eventually we discovered that Oregon Health Plan did cover it, and that was just an unintentional discovery, but that's when I started feeling like the system is broken. If you have people who are working and taking care of their kids and have private insurance, since that is the current system we have, then they should also be able to access the same mental health care for their kids, because it's not just people who are low income or adults having severe mental illness who need mental health care. Because autism falls under mental health care, which a lot of people don't realize.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, can you take a minute or two to talk about 1 or 2 pieces of legislation you would want to bring to Salem?
I think knocking on the doors, we hear about the economy, crime, and homelessness. I think the first thing that I would do, I know there's a petition petition that's out for the seniors to reduce or freeze their I just lost my train of thought. Freeze their property tax. And I think we can do that as the legislature, bring that ahead, not bring it to the voters. We can do that now. There's enough support, I believe. We don't want our elderly, our most vulnerable that are on a fixed income to have to pay more during all the inflation that's going on. I think the other one would be Measure 110. When you look at that, you look at the e-ticket, there's no, people show up or they don't show up, and there's no punishment or there's no accountability in it. And we have enough ways to tweak it where if you show up, you get your e-ticket and you don't show up to court, you get a failure to appear, and then it's a arrestable offense. And then we get the people into treatment and get them in to where they need to be, because mental health, drug use, there's a combination of those two, and I saw it on the street for over 25 years, that if you're addicted to drugs or you are having mental health issues and you don't take the medications that the doctors give you, you go to street level drugs, we can get that help and get people what they need and get those, hopefully get those solutions and get them off the street, get them the medications that they need and get that supervision to get them back out in society and not maybe relapse into using regular drugs.
Well, I'm curious, could I just follow up on that, Jeff? So you were on the street for a long time, and we all know the statistics that you are probably arresting the same people over and over again. You arrest them, send them to jail, they get out, you arrest them again, you send them back to jail. What was the system? What was the premise of Measure 110, that we should try something different? Did you agree with that premise, or do you think the whole thing was flawed from the outset?
I think it was flawed from the offset when you looked at it, because they decriminalized all drugs. To where it was just a violation. And I think once you do that, you set down a pathway that it's hard to recover back because there's no consequence. Using methamphetamines, using heroin is not good for you. It is just not. We can say that. You don't know you have addictive personality until you realize you do. And that's the problem I think that we have with this.
Could there have been a version of Measure 110 that still decriminalized, but maybe had a steeper fine, or made it clear that people had to actually show up? They couldn't just sort of skirt their violation. But is there a form of Measure 110 that you would have supported, or is it just an outright no based on the decriminalizing part?
I think in the legislature we can fix it like I described, but I voted no for it because I didn't think it was the right thing to do, because I've seen what drugs do to people. The Police Bureau created a program when I was in School Police Division where we showed faces of meth to youth, and they didn't realize the outcomes when you start using drugs, where you can end up. And so that was a big deal, and I'm an adamant no on that. I don't think that was the right way to go.
Mm-hmm. And can you describe again how you would seek to fix Measure 110? I'm not sure I entirely understood that.
So Measure 110, you get an e-ticket or a citation.
Right.
And if you don't show up to the court and grab your treatment, then you get a fail to appear, what would be considered a fail to appear. That then becomes a criminal charge. A warrant then would be issued for your arrest. Then you would go to jail, see the judge the next day or within the allotted time if there's jail space, and then get them in that diversion drug treatment program.
So you'd essentially make the e-ticket, which is now voluntary and nobody is actually using as a pathway to treatment, you'd make it a more certain pathway to treatment.
Yeah, it'd be a forced pathway, yes.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say that part of the problem is that the decriminalization happened immediately, but the funding and the setting up of the treatment has not completed yet. And so the majority of Oregonians who have been surveyed still want Measure 110, but they want it to be fully implemented, which means currently, even if they showed up, there are no beds, which is what I was talking about earlier, is we don't have a place to send people even when they want to voluntarily go, much less when they've been served through 110 and given a decriminalization on a personal amount. And so if we don't increase the number of beds and the available treatment, of course it's not going to work. But the whole point of 110 was to fund additional treatment. And so we need to do that piece now before we throw the baby out with the bathwater.
So, I mean, it sounds like what one of the legislation pieces you said you would bring is creating more treatment beds. But it sounds like what you're also saying is that we just need to wait for Measure 110 funding to flow out, which,
No.
It exists.
I
So
don't
you
think
want
waiting.
both of those things
I think
happen?
so. I think we need to look at sources of funding, and I am not an expert on the budget yet, so I don't know where that would come from, and that would be working, with people who already know the budget inside and out. But definitely we need to do that, because when I worked with people who were homeless down at the shelter, I had people who were ready to go to treatment and were on wait lists, and they stayed clean for 3 months, but then they would relapse, and once you relapse, you can't go into treatment. Some of them never got called up for a bed. Some of them did, but it was too late because they'd already relapsed. If we'd had beds and treatment available, they could have gotten in, gone through treatment, gotten off drugs, and probably gotten out of the cycle of homelessness.
Sure, maybe I wasn't clear about this, but what I'm asking is, it sounds like, Measure 110 obviously is going to create more beds. It hasn't yet because the funding hasn't flowed.
Yep.
But you're also saying you want to bring legislation to get more treatment beds. Do you think both of those need to happen at the same time, or do you think that would be doubling up on something?
I don't think that it would be doubling up, but I still have a lot to learn, so I'm always open to new information. But the problems that we're seeing with the state hospital at this point are extremely concerning, right? And we have people that are in jail who need to be in treatment, and we don't have space for them either. And so we're talking about a couple of different things. There's like a state hospital level where it's chronic mental illness, and then we're talking about a drug treatment treatment or a mental illness bed where somebody can go in for a limited time inpatient, get their medications straightened out, and get back into some other into society through the other programs that we have, versus and also just day treatment needs to be more available as well.
So one of the things we always ask candidates about is for a demonstration of how they think independently or act independently. So let's ask Jeff first. Jeff, you're running as a Republican. I assume when you were at PPB, you were probably a member of the PPA, is that right?
Yeah, the police union, yes, it was.
Yeah. So is there a place that you can tell us about where you have taken a position either when you were a legislator, when you went against your caucus, or in your life when you have said, well, other Republicans think X, but I think Y. An example the other day in House District 49, for instance, the Republican Randy Lauer, who's running in that district, said, well, I'm a pro-choice Republican. That's an unpopular position these days, but that's my position. Just curious if you could point to a place where you'd say you're independent.
So, in 18, there were several votes. It was like, I only voted with the party about 70 to 73% of the time. But there's one bill that I voted on. It was about the Dreamers being the Dream Act, and those people being eligible for scholarships at the state level. And I voted for that, and a lot of Republicans didn't. And some people looked at me sideways a little bit. I'm like, these kids are here. They're here because their parents came up, and they're not from America. But we shouldn't limit their ability to have an education and to have them be able to get a college education.
Okay, great. That's a great example. How about you, Darcy?
Well, currently, of course, City Council is nonpartisan, so I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I would say that primarily my places where I differ around the party are things where it's an urban-rural divide kind of issue. For example, farming practices. I am opposed to preventing all use of diesel, especially for farmers who tend to use that until we have a successful alternative. Also, things around labor laws. For farming, because I know that farmers have a very thin profit margin and we need to balance that out.
So you would have voted, there was a big, very controversial farm worker overtime bill. The Democrats pushed hard to get farm workers paid overtime. You would have voted no.
I don't know how I would have voted on that issue. At the time, I was focused on City Council and I haven't gone back to look at it. However, I did talk with Anna Williams about it, and I think that she and I kind of came down on the same side of the issue. This is something that I would want to talk with farmers about and find some kind of solution.
Farmers were very, very clear that they opposed it. They went to the mat on this. Yeah. So you must have some idea where you would vote.
Well, I think that I probably would have voted no, because there wasn't any way for farmers to work around it. And farming, we need farmers. We need farms.
Well, police officers get paid overtime, nurses get paid overtime. Yep. Most people who get paid by the hour get paid extra when they work overtime. Why should farm workers be any different?
Well, I think that what I heard is from even the farm workers themselves that they couldn't afford to not work. So if they weren't going to be paid overtime, they were going to stop working and they were just going to go to another farm and work. So they would still be working the same number of hours just for multiple farmers in order to make it happen. And so, it's a tough one. I do think that people should be paid overtime, but I also realize that in industries, it's not always possible without some kind of solution.
Okay, great, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make sure I heard something right. I heard Darcy say that she and Anna spoke, and her and Anna fell on the same side of the issue. So that means she would have voted for it because Anna did vote for that farm overtime bill.
Well, I didn't know. That's not what I was saying.
Okay, so you talked about it with her. She was a yes, but you would have been a no.
Yeah, we talked about the issues that gave her pause. And
yeah, but she still voted with her caucus. You would not have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that.
Any other questions?
Sure. Who is your biggest supporter in this race financially? Who's your biggest donor?
Future PAC.
Okay. Jeff?
So bring balance to Salem PAC. the pack that Greg Walden started.
Oh yeah, isn't that Clem's pack?
No, Clem's Pack is a different pack.
Called Brain
Pack's a
Balance?
different one.
Yeah.
Sorry, Brain Balance?
Bring balance.
Bring balance.
Oh, bring,
Bring
okay,
balance
bring.
to Salem.
Got it. Okay. What else do I want to know in this contest? So the district, we talked about, I'm sure when I was not here, we discussed the district boundaries changing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So have we discussed how that may have changed the voter demographics of that
No.
district? All right. So I'm curious, Jeff, if you've seen a distinction. This is like, what, your third time campaigning on this seat, right?
Yes.
So are you seeing a distinction at all in the demographics of who's going to vote for you this time around? In other words, now that you have the Dalles, does that change anything, or are you going to lose by like 1% again?
That is, the Dalles basically helps for us for that, because the new district, city limits to the Dalles, Sandy River into Gresham, cuts back through Orient and 26, carved out Sandy, back up in Orient, Damascus, and back on the backside of Mosier, and then in the Dalles. Out knocking the doors, it's not, it was a 7, I think a -7 or 7+ Democrat voter registration, but on the doors, it's not what I'm hearing. People are tired of what's going on in Salem, they're tired of everything. I think it actually helped going to the Dalles because it fits more the rural side of the district, being in Hood River with the agricultural, and then into the Dalles itself. It's the same part of the same thought processes that are there.
Sure. How do you find yourself trying to appeal to people who might in fact be more in that farming rural community?
So I grew up on a family
Sorry,
farm ranch.
that was actually a question. That was actually a question for Darcy, but why not have you
Oh,
ask?
sorry.
No, Jeff, go ahead and answer it first, and then we'll ask the same question to both.
Oh, so I grew up in a family farm and ranch in Nebraska, and so I have a really great understanding of that. We still own property in Nebraska, we still ranch, we still farm. The wheat prices, as soon as Ukraine was allowed to sell, the shipments come out of Ukraine for wheat, my wheat prices went down, so we lost money. So I'm very, very keen on that, still involved in the family business. But also I make connections here in the nursery industries, the farming industry, the cattle industry. It's just still part of my blood. And we spend a lot of time back there helping out people here during wheat harvest.
Darcy, same question. Sorry about that.
No problem. I would say that I am just trying to learn as much as I can about the issues in order, I mean, that's the thing is I will just always tell people what I think and what I believe. So I'm working on getting the education. Both of my grandparents were farmers in this area in Oregon and Washington. I have my first job was actually pulling rye out of a wheat field, so I started there. I've done a lot of the farm tours about different methods of farming wheat and cherries, and I'm just always looking for that information. So I don't know that I'm really like trying to get anybody's vote. I'm just telling people what I stand for, and I don't represent just Democrats. I actually beat out Jeff for the nomination for the Independent Party of Oregon, and I'm also been nominated by the Working Families Party of Oregon. So I have a broad coalition of support, and I would disagree about bringing the Dalles in, making the district more red. The Dalles actually has a registration edge of blue, and I'm very well known there, and on the doors, definitely people are saying, we know you, we love you. When I call, people just interrupt and say, yep, we're voting for you, definitely, absolutely. And I'm getting that same thing even out in Sandy and Clackamas area, and of course, definitely Hood River.
Measure 114 is on the ballot this November. It would make it more difficult for people to buy guns, or however you want to phrase that, and it would limit capacity of magazines to 10 bullets. Jeff, how are you going to vote on that?
I'm going to vote no. I think it goes too far. I think that it's going to cost the state a lot of money to try to defend that. It's going to end up in a long litigation. And I'm an adamant. I support the Second Amendment. I support also gun ownership, but being smart about it. As a police officer, I've seen things. I don't want to touch what's a constitutional protected right.
So you have, I'm sure, seen a lot of things. You've seen, I'm sure you rolled up on murder scenes or shooting scenes many times. Is there any gun restriction that you would support, or do you not support any additional restrictions above what?
I support anybody that's illegally possessing a firearm, and they be prosecuted. That's what we're lacking, I think, is that heavy prosecution in that. They took away a lot of the RICO stuff at the state level. There's that Hoover trial going on right now, where it's racketeering for those individuals that were gang members, killing people with guns, and they didn't get accountable. There's got to be some consequences for actions, and I don't see that right now.
Okay. Darcy, how about you, Measure 114?
So I'm voting in favor of 114. It's not perfect, but really no legislation ever is. And clearly what we're doing now or not doing is not working. And I'm very concerned about gun violence and putting it into that. I'm also concerned about suicide with guns. I am pro Second Amendment. I belong to the Democratic Party of Oregon's Gun Owners Caucus. I've been a gun owner. I was married to a law enforcement officer. I'm well aware of issues. I also know that the more laws that you have on the books, so that when you do catch somebody who's not supposed to have a gun, that you can actually prosecute them and add more charges and more time and more punishment. My ex-husband also worked at Bi-Mart selling guns, and people think that the prohibition or the background check prevents people from trying to get guns. The thing is, a lot of people try to get a gun and go through the background check knowing full well that they're not allowed to have it. And that background check still rules a lot of people out. And so I think it's very common sense. My parents grew up as part of the NRA. I grew up involved with that. I took the hunter safety course through NRA when it was about hunter safety and not what it's become. My parents don't like what it's become now, and I agree with that. But even as staunchly pro-gun as my parents are, they still want background checks. They still want the things that Measure 110 is for, and so do I. Or sorry, 114.
114, yeah,
Yes,
okay,
and
great,
so do
thank
I.
you. Mark, anything?
I don't know.
All right, then, Sophie, why don't you ask the fun question?
Okay, our fun question of the cycle is, if the world were ending tomorrow, what's the one food you would want to eat? Not a whole meal, just
or
one
drink.
food. Or drink, that works too. You can only name one. Jeff?
Prime rib.
Prime rib, okay. And Darcy?
Wow, that's a tough one. I'm not that much of a foodie, so I think I would say Bing cherries.
Bing
Good
cherries.
choice.
All right.
All right, thank you both.
Thanks,
Really
guys.
appreciate it.
Appreciate
Have a
it.
great day.
Thanks for coming in.
Bye.